Welcome to the Passion of Entrepreneurship. This is the final episode of what started out as every weekday in June and has bled over. But I have loved this journey, getting to chat with amazing business owners to find out what it is that fuels them, what drives their passion. And today I have the final living dinosaur with us, Chris Tex-Rex, T-Rex
There you
Lavelle. Welcome,
Nice
Chris.
to be here, Robbie. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I really appreciate it.
I expected you to be on here with your T-Rex head on, man.
It was something that I had considered, but I figured I'd at least bring a dinosaur t-shirt.
All right, that works. That works. So, welcome aboard, Chris. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Robbie. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, I love the Mutual Admiration Society. Uh, so, the interesting thing now, Chris, what we want to dive into is your entrepreneurial journey. Okay, so
Excellent.
you is this something that really was a bug that bit you even when you were young, or is it something that you came to
Honestly,
later?
in fact, I can absolutely say categorically, I actually was anti-entrepreneurial journey because I
Really?
watched my father start his own. Oh, yeah. I watched my father start his own business, and he was a great example of someone who had deep knowledge in a subject matter expertise area, but didn't really have any real grounds for starting a business. Probably shouldn't have started his own business. And after 40 plus years of struggling to survive in his own business, he eventually ended the business. And of course, he moved on to retirement out of that. But what I took out of it was, oh my gosh, don't become an entrepreneur. Don't be a solopreneur.
You
Don't have
so
your own
failed.
business. And so I at first went the same yeah,
The
yeah,
job,
no, but I
Job.
failed on that, yes. But that's right. I took the job. I became a finance corporate citizen, if you will. I became a CFO eventually as well in the corporate world. But funnily enough, I met somebody along that journey that had a very different spin on the entrepreneurial journey. And her side of the family had all done entrepreneurial businesses. Now, they were not necessarily any more successful than my own father was, but their passion for it, what they took out of it, was very different in the experience. And so she learned a very different lesson out of it than I did. And that would be my lovely bride, Amanda Kaufman.
Okay. What? And I think, am I right in saying that really what you're getting at is the concept that was popularized by the E-Myth about working, people who love what they do, they love working in the business, but they don't necessarily have the ability to step out to work on the business.
Well, in the case of my father, yes. In his case, he was a master's level horticulturalist, and his expertise area was in deep knowledge about plants.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that doesn't translate to running a plant-based business as a wholesale or as a florist or anything else. So as a result, he struggled with that business side of actually running a business, even though his knowledge was very deep.
Right.
So that was the experience I took out of it, was that, A, don't run your own business. It's very risky. Instead, go the safe route. Become an expert in an area, say finance, like myself in that case, but then do it within the confines of a business for stability. You'll have a little bit more freedom that way, less risk, all of that. Except that eventually I figured out that wasn't quite true, at least not the way I thought it. Because
So,
at the end of the day, it's somebody else's agenda, and you don't really have the control that you might have as an entrepreneur.
and that's something I'm starting to find. I found as a trend is that there is a tinge of control freak among business owners.
That's a nice way to put it, I guess, or is that a nice way to put it? I don't know. But yeah, I think you absolutely hit a little bit of a nail on the head, because I think one of the freedoms that so many entrepreneurs and solopreneurs highlight is they want freedom of creativity, or freedom of schedule, or freedom of location or finances, all of these different freedoms. But it usually comes down, interestingly enough, on July 3rd, right before July 4th, to some form of freedom. And you could call that control. Absolutely.
Okay. So take me through that point where, I mean, you had gone all the way to being a CFO. You were bound and determined not to be an entrepreneur. Take me
Absolutely.
through that journey of how that entrenched attitude, because you learn from your and we do that so often, right? Our parents are this way and we learn, oh, I'm never
Many
going
people
to do
do.
that. Yeah, and so take me on that journey
Absolutely.
of how you shifted your mindset.
Well, I'll be honest, I didn't do it on my own. And I think that may be true for a lot of folks that go on an entrepreneurial journey. It's not suddenly a switch that flips necessarily for all people. Maybe that is the case for some, but it's more of a casual discovery or maybe an accidental discovery over time that leads them to it. And in my case, certainly there was an element of, well, gee, I really don't have as much control as I thought I did. I don't control my schedule. I don't control what I work on. I don't have freedom of finance or necessarily even of time or location in the corporate world I was in. And I realized, gosh, I really wanted that more. The older I got, the less I wanted to do what others wanted to dictate for me to do. And the more I wanted to find my own path, leave my own mark in the world, so to speak. And I realized I wasn't really doing it, at least not the way I wanted to, as a corporate citizen, as a CFO. And along that journey, well, that was kind of my input into that journey, I met my lovely bride I talked about, who had had a very different experience of the entrepreneurial world. Same kind of factual results, not amazing success in her family's businesses. However, the experience she took from it was, you can do anything you want if you lean into it enough. And I happened to meet this young lady and realize, holy cow, there's some stuff I've been missing out on. Because even though she was successful in also a corporate consulting world, we actually both met working at Accenture as consultants. We realized, though, that there was something that just wasn't quite fitting there. And the more I talked to her about it, the more I began to explore, well, gee, what would it look like?
Right.
So her entrepreneurial journey not long after that. And I watched the things that worked and didn't work for her. Go ahead, Robbie.
So there was a real curiosity there. You're saying, okay, this wasn't what, going the opposite of what my dad isn't all it was cracked up to be. And you're starting to be curious, and now
Absolutely.
you're seeing here's the other. And the other thing, before we skip past it, that I want to touch on is you said she had very similar experiences, but it's the meaning that she put on those experiences that changed it all
Absolutely.
compared to the meaning
Absolutely.
you had.
There was a total different perspective applied. Absolutely. And perspective makes a difference, because that's what I think we're really talking about here is perspective. We have very similar experiences in our family lives of the entrepreneurial journey, but the perception we applied to it, the way we applied our perspective was very different. And, honestly, the same is true. I don't want to sound like I'm lambasting or negative on corporate life. With the right perspective, that can be very rewarding for someone. But it depends on your perspective. It depends on your perception of what you're experiencing in that. And for me, over time, that perception had changed. It was no longer satisfying for me. And then when a new opportunity to explore new avenues of freedom, for example, or control, as you said earlier, came up, I jumped on it. And it's been something I've never turned my head back from again. And I have to say, I give credit to my lovely bride, Amanda, who's lit the torch up the hill. She's the one that runs ahead. And I watch the 4 things that didn't work, but then I do the 5th thing that did work for her. And that's made all the difference.
All right. So now you've got me curious. So let's start with the 4 that didn't work.
Oh, well, it's 4 metaphorically more than anything. I'm not sure that there are 4 specific things. It's been many years now that I recall. But one thing I did notice is she was very quick to try new things. And not just dabble in it, but actually go deep enough in it to get knowledgeable about how does this work? How does this function? And to put it into practice in her business. Now, some of those things didn't work. Some of those things did work. And over time, testing that out, especially the first year or so, it was very quick and possible to see, okay, well, this thing didn't work, but this thing over here kind of worked. Maybe if I did it a little bit different, I'd get a little better result out of it. And so it became a matter of testing a few things, see what worked and didn't work, take the things that came close to working and see if you can improve on them just a little bit and continue that discovery process.
So I'm hearing something really, there's a distinction I'm hearing under this. There's some people that just go, oh, shiny, and just, but you use the
Absolutely.
word testing. And that's a distinction. It's not just
Absolutely.
grabbing the shiny. It's okay, let's try this and see. Because my background, I started out in sciences. I was a quantum physicist. And so I still have that
Oh, there you go.
mindset, right? Of I'm a scientist and everything. Let's explore. Let's test and hypothesis and work through with data.
Absolutely. My lovely bride is a chemical engineer, and I
Yay.
began life interested in the, yeah, exactly. I began life interested in the sciences and almost went down an engineering path myself. So a deep love of the science in general and specifically of the scientific method. And that's very much what we apply in growing our entrepreneurial business. In our case, in a coaching business, we try different things. We come with a hypothesis. We test the hypothesis. We get some data, try to remove the emotional judgment from the data and say, okay, well, what is the data telling us? And then based on that data, say, okay, did the hypothesis work as expected or not? Tweak the hypothesis and come back and test it again. So to your point, testing and getting real data is what really matters. Now, not just one or two little data points, actually really do a robust test. Some people call this split testing, for example,
Yep.
when you're doing online marketing. I see the head nod, so I know you know what I'm talking about there. And so that kind of test really gives you a real sense of, okay, have I missed something? Is there something more to explore here? And it really has to come with a true dedication to getting real data, not just feels right, although that can be where you start from a hypothetical perspective. But once you start getting the data, you have to really kind of follow where the data leads you a little bit.
Okay. So let's explore that a bit. So that's the data, that's the rational, that's the left brain. Something
Mhm.
else, though, that I've learned to trust absolutely, and even if the data goes the opposite route, is my intuition. So where do you stand on intuition?
Oh, sure. So where does intuition come into play with this? Well, you could look at that a couple of ways. You could say that intuition is some deeper logic in your brain that recognizes a pattern that's there that maybe you don't see consciously. And therefore you lean into it and discover it. And then voila, there is some logic behind it as you get into it. That's certainly one way you could look at it. There's also an element of people who believe in a religious approach. Maybe that's the gift from God for those who believe in that approach, in that context. And some believe that it's just blind luck. Although really, I think at the end of the day, you're a physicist, you said. There's a lot of law that we don't understand in the scientific law per se. So there's always new discoveries. And therefore, there could be other laws you're not aware of that are behind it, driving it. And the same is true in this context. Now, I will say that there's a lot of joy in that discovery process. So experimenting, as we're kind of talking about, can be a lot of creative fun. And that's certainly the approach we take on it because it brings a lot more fun to what we do on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
It might work if we did this. What if we tried these three things? Let's see what happens. And then we go have some fun with it. Exactly, a little bit of the mad scientist approach. And you've seen that with me. Yeah, exactly. You've seen that with me a little bit, particularly around humor. So I experiment a lot with humor in attracting the kind of people that we like to work with. Yeah, go figure, right? So the way I like to phrase that is we're a little weird. We're kind of science, we're self-avowed sciencey nerds. We approach our coaching business in kind of that nerdy kind of way. And so we let that weird light out and shine so we can attract our other fellow weirdos that are going to resonate with it. And then we experiment with that laughter to help us find more of those people that we can help.
But that comes down to me, is another word that ties into is authenticity. You're not putting on a face, you're being you.
Absolutely. Well, and that ties very much into one of the things that we talk about a lot, as particularly in our focus, we help coaches launch and grow their coaching business. And so authenticity comes up a lot in that. How do they put that authentic self out there to attract the type of people that they actually want to work with? Well, if you're putting on a show or putting on an act, well, then one, that's hard to keep up over time consistently. And two, you may be attracting people that you didn't intend to attract, that are not the ones you really want to serve. So the ability to be authentic and really put yourself out there makes it easier to be consistent, and it ensures you attract people that you actually want to work with in your business that actually want to work with you. And that's that weird light shine that attracts your other fellow weirdos I talked about.
Well, and I think that people can sense when you're not being authentic. It may look good, it may look slick, but there's something they go, it's not right.
Absolutely. The human brain is amazing at picking up on subtle cues. And certainly when somebody's not being authentic, there are verbal cues, there are facial cues, there are all kinds of cues that somebody can give that the other person kind of goes, something's not quite right. I mean, as social creatures, we've evolved to be able to spot those very rapidly because it made the difference in life and death when there were lions and tigers and bears.
Oh
So
my.
certainly, absolutely, absolutely. You know, we're no longer in the wild like we were, but we still have those evolved traits biologically. And certainly that's, for example, we could get into a whole discussion on unconscious bias and how that factors in.
Totally.
And
Well,
certainly there's
that's
an element of that in there as well.
all, that's all in our face now with the Black Lives Matter movement that's
Absolutely.
amplifying. The and
Absolutely. Yeah.
coming from the speakers world as well, which I've dabbled in, which has completely shifted in the last 3 months. You can go to
Absolutely.
watch a keynote and they're telling the story. They've got the pauses, they've got the this, they've got they've trained it, but you're going, that's something's not right. I'm not feeling it. They're not being authentic.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so to your point earlier, you can absolutely tell when somebody's not being authentic, when they're not giving you the straight story, when they're not showing their real selves. Now, having said that, certainly there are things that maybe you don't share with others for privacy or other reasons. That's not the same as being inauthentic.
Totally.
That's a personal boundary in that context, and that's totally okay in that case, at least as far as I'm concerned. But certainly, to the extent that you can let people understand what you're really like, to the extent that you can let them understand maybe the journey you've been on and how that might equate to a journey for them, that helps people understand a little bit more what you're really about. And specifically, it helps them determine, are you tuned into my radio station, WIIFM? What's in it for me? And that's really the goal when you're doing things, for example, like coaching or like you're talking about. You want to try and connect with the person on their station, because everybody's only tuned into that one station. What's in it for me? WIIFM.
Totally. So,
And so one of the things you said,
no, please go ahead, Chris. One of the things I said was,
well, so you were talking about authenticity and how that might help you or how that might impact you in whatever business you're doing, whether it's speaking from the stage, like you were describing for yourself, or whether you're working with coaches, like say my wife and I do to help them launch and grow their coaching biz. In that case, the ability to be authentic regularly, consistently, frequently, and communicate that has a big difference in how it benefits your business. And this is really what I would touch on from an entrepreneurial perspective. A lot of entrepreneurs tend to focus on a huge lift. I've got this big goal on the mountain that I'm targeting and aiming for, and I've got to make a big shift to get there. But what they realize is, if you use mountain climbing as an analogy, you don't go from base camp to the top of the mountain instantly. It's not a single jump or step. It's a series of small steps that build. Think about all the people that climb Everest, which literally takes days. There's acclimation at each level up the mountain, for example. You don't go from bottom straight to the top, even though it's not that far distance-wise. It's a very great effort, though. And so what we usually try and suggest in our business, for example, to help coaches be more successful is, guys, consider a BAM. A BAM is a bare beep minimum. I would be respectful of your audience, but it's a BAM stands for bare beep minimum. Let's just call it that, okay? And then you take small, consistent steps to make your way up the mountain. So those BAMs, in this case, are those steps that you can take that have a low barrier to entry, but you can do them frequently and consistently. And authenticity relates to this by demonstrating frequently and consistently what you're really like. That helps people build a know, like, and trust with you on their own journey, in their own way. And over time, you can begin to layer these BAMs. Then you notice you're going up the mountain now with consistency and frequency and authentically with yourself, if you apply that in this context.
well, and I love the metaphor the part of that metaphor that you need to spend time at each camp to acclimate to the pressure and all. So it's not just consistent. There's going to come times where you plateau for a while and have to allow yourself to, upgrade your
Catch your
systems,
breath.
do whatever, all of that before you start
Absolutely.
moving again.
Well, absolutely. And I love the analogy of mountain climbing, particularly in this context, because you may climb one mountain, say an expertise area, say corporate CFO, for example, in my context. But then you maybe want to go climb another mountain, like running and starting an entrepreneurial coaching business. Well, that doesn't mean that I can jump from this mountaintop straight over to the top of that other mountaintop. I've got some learning to do. I've got some skills I need to build. So you start again, whether it may be at the bottom at base camp on that next mountain, or because you've got now some experience and skills that translate from your prior mountain, maybe you can go a little faster up the hill or start a little higher up. You just don't go all the way to the top.
So I'm curious, when you switched from the corporate route to the entrepreneurial,
Mm-hmm.
you know, something I suspect you may have been asked is what transferred, but I want to go a different direction. What did you have to unlearn when you
I'm so glad you asked that. I'm so glad you asked that. And I'll touch on the first part afterwards, if you don't mind. So I'll answer
yeah,
your question first and then touch on that other part. So what didn't I transfer is what I think I heard you describe as the question. What
yeah,
did I have to unlearn in that
and
case?
stop doing?
Well, and stop doing. So some of the things that I had to really unlearn were, first off, the realization that nobody was going to create my schedule for me. Nobody was going to ensure things got done for me. If they were going to get done, they were going to get done because I got them done, for example, or I and the team I'm working with got them done. It was no longer a thing where somebody further up a process was going to deliver to me something that I then needed to review or process myself and hand off. Instead, it was more, okay, wait, so full on, what is going to need to happen today if things are going to happen? So there's a little bit of a distinction there, certainly. I would also say, certainly coming from a CFO background, that was very much a finance silo, if you will. So I wasn't responsible for the making of the money, sales, for example. I wasn't responsible for R&D, for example. I wasn't responsible for marketing. I did finance in that tower of finance, so to speak, as a CFO. But now that I was out of that, I realized I had to unlearn that siloed mindset and realize, well, I'm also the chief marketing officer. I'm also the sales team. I'm also customer service, and all of these other areas that maybe I didn't have as much experience with prior to the entrepreneurial journey. Now, to address the other side of that, because that was kind of what did I have to unlearn, there are some things that do transfer very directly. And that really is part of what helped push me out the door into the entrepreneurial journey. And that was, I realized, yeah, I was good as a CFO. I could get those things done. But what I really liked about being an executive in a corporate environment was running the teams, was specifically coaching the teams and the individuals on those teams to higher performance. So it was really less for me in the day-to-day about debits and credits and making this entry and that entry anymore. It was more about the enjoyment of helping people improve their capabilities, their execution, their efficiency, and perform better individually and as a team. But I realized I wasn't getting paid for that. That's just the part that I loved. That was the passion for me. So, well, gee, is there a way that I can get paid for that part of it and get rid of the stuff that's really not enjoyable on a daily basis? A la coaching. That's kind of what began my journey through the coaching side of things. And so I brought all of that love and passion for developing people, helping them grow, helping them find their journey, and improve their performance. All of that got to come with me, all of those skills there, and I got to use it in a whole new way.
Okay. So now, as you've moved through this, I mean, if anyone who's run business for a while, we run into caca. So I was wondering if you could share one example where, like it all hit the fan. And how did you, first of all, how did you respond? And then how did you pull up your big boy dinosaur outfit
Big boy underwear.
and move through it?
Gotcha. Well, I wear a kilt, so that made it a little bit easier for starters. But to answer your question, let's see. So some of the instances where we had some kind of aha moments that maybe made us realize, we have a problem here we need to get past. Well, a couple of those, for example, in the entrepreneurial journey are just related to figuring out what to prioritize. Because in the very beginning of our business, even before excuse me, even before I was actively involved in the business my wife and I were working together, when it was just her and I was kind of behind the scenes doing the administrative stuff, there was a realization of, well, gee, this is a business and it needs to make money and we have expenses we need to pay. Obviously, I know that from the finance background, but how do we prioritize things right to make sure that this business can continue? And that can look a lot of different ways. Early on, that looked like, for example, the realization of we're not charging enough. We're not making enough relative to where we are cost-wise to make this a real going concern. And so one of the things we had to sit down and think about is, well, okay, if we don't want to go back to our prior roles, what do we need to do in the business to make sure we prioritize the right kinds of tasks so that we don't have to go back to the corporate roles we didn't want to go in and therefore be more successful in where we are? And so that required us to sit down and really do some deep thinking about, first off, clarity of what does the business need to make? I think a lot of people, particularly in the coaching world, when they want to become a coach, it starts and sparks from this desire to have real impact, which is admirable. That's an admirable solution. But they then often don't therefore think about, well, gee, if I want to keep doing this full time, I need to be able to pay Mr. Mortgage and Mrs. Visa. I mean, I still have to pay for those things. So they don't give a lot of thought to pricing. Yeah, a minor point, right? And so they don't give a lot of thought to pricing. And so that first big hurdle we kind of really hit was the realization of we're just not charging enough. I mean, we went through that experience. I'll own it right up, even with a finance background and knowing that there's a lot to do when you start a business. You've obviously done it. We've done it as well. There's a lot when you're on a solopreneur journey that you have to keep track of. And it's impossible to do it all. That's why it becomes so important to prioritize the right tasks that are going to move you forward. And the question that we often reflect on in our business that really helped us in this stage was not what are all the things we could do, not what's the big plan and building out an umpteenth level of plan to the nth level. Instead, it was, what's the next most right thing we have to do in the business to get a chance to do another next most right thing? Once we made it that simple, it really helped a lot to focus on the right priorities. Now, you may have a little bit of a plan. I'm not saying go without a plan, but you don't need to build out a 56,000 level document for a year-long plan your first year in entrepreneurial journey. You need to be real clear on what's going to move the needle, what's going to keep you in business, and what are the right priorities short-term. What's that next most right step? So that helped us a lot through some of those challenges early on, but particularly that reflective question on next most right step and how much do we need to charge to stay in this path and not have to go get distracted back to a corporate role.
Right. Now, what you've just said takes me to, I've found one of the biggest challenges with business owners, with entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and I remember going through this as well, is that they don't value what they provide and they way underprice. They're afraid to charge and they do not see the value that they're really providing. How did you get through that? Because you said you were charging too little. So how did you get through that saying, no, what we offer is worth this?
I think the biggest hurdle with a lot of that for entrepreneurs is they are putting their own perception of values on the product. Instead, we talked about the scientific method and testing and data out there. Instead, let the people that are receiving the benefit give you a sense of value. So test it, test prices, things like that, and get real data back that you can use to determine, am I priced right or not? Because at the end of the day, it's not so much what you as the creator, say the solopreneur, views as the value. It's what does your customer base view as the value? Are they willing to value it?
Totally. Whoops, you just froze up for a sec. And we are just gonna give that a sec and see if we get you back. Chris, testing 1, 2, 4. We know you're out there. Hello, Chris. Now, Chris, there is a chat there that you can chat to me. If you can hear me, can you just type into that just so that I know that? Whoop, okay, he's popped out. He will be back. I am assuming he will be right back. I want to dive into this part about the valuing your worth, because I think that's a critical piece that a lot of business owners are challenged with, is how do we, we don't feel that we are worth what we really need to charge. And that's a real challenge, and I totally agree with Chris about testing it. While we're waiting for it to come back, I remember I do a lot of my work is in the field of innovation, and once I was doing this 1 day workshop. There he be. You're
Sorry
back.
about that, Rob.
Yeah, you're back. So
everybody is home for the quarantine.
That's okay.
And so as a result, the bandwidth in our area is a little reduced.
Okay. I was just mentioning while you're gone, this whole idea of testing. I do a lot of innovation work, and back in the 90s, I did a 1 day workshop on innovation, reinventing your marketing, and I guaranteed people that at the end of the day, I had them figure out how much they estimated their marketing would increase. And I said, if it's not at least 5 times, or cut it in half, or double it. What was it? Yeah, cut it in half, and cut it in half again if it's still too big. And if it wasn't at least 5 times what they paid, I'd give them the check back, right? So
Gotcha.
I charged $99 for the 1 day workshop, and I got people coming up with ways to increase their revenues by 2,000-3,000, and conservative charged $199. They started coming up with ways to increase it by 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. Charged $599, and they started. Different people showed up, and they started coming up ways to increase the revenues by 20,000, 30,000. Same material.
Absolutely. That's true. And what you're describing is a little bit of the skin in the game kind of model. The more skin somebody puts in the game, money in this context for what we're describing, the more they're likely to show up and bring their best to the game. And that's really one of the big lessons, back on the pricing topic before we lost that connection there for a minute. That's one of the big lessons we try and help coaches understand. And we always share this story. Amanda started her coaching business offering $10 packages. $10 for an hour. Now, granted, that was her first customer, which is pretty common for coaches. And it was $10 an hour for 8 sessions, so $80, sold to her best friend. That person never showed up, not a single day, because they didn't have any real skin in the game.
Right.
Any real skin in the game. Fast forward 3 months, literally 3 months later, she'd gotten some good coaching. She'd gotten some good thought process working on it. She'd done her own work around her own issues with money and pricing and value and things like that. She then sold a year-long package for $30,000. Big difference in a matter of months. But it took getting right with the mindset she had about her value of what she was doing. And that's really coming off of what I was describing earlier, which is Mr. or Miss Entrepreneur. It's not so much what you value it as, it's what does your client value it as. And I often give this as a specific example for a contextual comparison. If you're a career coach, for example, and you're helping somebody go from a $40,000 a year restaurant job, for example, and they want to get an $80,000 a year corporate job, for example, that's worth a difference in their income of $40,000. Now, are you, Mr. and Miss Coach, going to see that $40,000? No. However, do you think $40,000 would be worth maybe a $4,000 investment to that person? That's a pretty easy trade-off. That's a tenfold improvement in their salary for the benefit of that coaching that helped them move forward to that new role. That's a lot easier context to help people understand the value proposition then. And also to remember, when a person responds back to you and says, oh, that's too expensive, or, oh, I'm not sure it's worth that, they're not giving a value judgment on you. Often what they're doing is they're getting their own money thinking into the way, often in that case. Because usually people confuse an objection right? Actually, they confuse a complaint about the cost of something with an objection, meaning I literally can't afford it. Those are not the same things. And so it's important to be clear on when it's an objection and when it's a complaint.
Right.
They may look similar, but they're not the same thing.
So right now, this last 3 months has knocked a lot of entrepreneurs on their butts.
A lot, yeah.
A lot of business owners. It's like, they're saying, I just can't do business my way. The way it was done, I can't, right? And what is your advice to business owners, whether it's coaches or in other ways, about how do you find your way forward in this time?
It goes back to that scientific method we talked about earlier. And the scientific method, as we recall, was really have a hypothesis, test it, be willing to change your hypothesis and test it again. And the same is very true in this day and time right now with all the changes going on. I mean, if you look back to where we were in our business, we were doing quite good. We've got 2 people that left corporate America that are able to make the same or better, actually, running their own coaching business now. And then we hit March with COVID. Then we hit May with some of the other things and political stuff going on. And so all of these various upheaval moments. But interestingly enough, because we took the mindset of test, improve, next most right step that we've been talking about in our discussion today, we actually continued to grow. And we have continued to grow actually at a faster rate over the last 3+ months, this last quarter, than we were in the first quarter of the year, than we were in the quarter before that. So it's actually continuing to grow and accelerate because we're not sticking to the same old thing that worked before and putting all our eggs in that basket and then just saying, hey, okay, we're good. Just do that some more. Instead, we're continuing to take that exploration, that experimentation mindset, and we're constantly trying new things. We come with a hypothesis. We test it. If we don't get the result we wanted or better, well, how can we change it and try again to improve on it and continue to explore? Change the hypothesis, experiment, and improve.
So I appreciate what you've done there, and I understand that method of step by step, right? Just focus. How did you, when this first hit, these things hit, how did you diffuse your anxiety and like the WTF about what's going on here?
Yeah.
How did you manage to step out of that to be able to say, okay, let's go back to what we know?
I think for me in particular, and for Amanda, it helped that we were both in this together and we had each other to lean on. A lot of solopreneurs are kind of in this journey on their own. For example, they may not have a supportive spouse that's on the journey with them, or they may feel they shoulder all of the risk on their own, all of the trial of stress and anxiety on their own.
Even if you have a team.
I had a partner that I could, yeah. Oh, or even if you have a team, you still feel that. It helped in my case that I have a true partner and we were both going to be in this together. And we were willing to sit down and ask some hard questions. Okay, what do we need to do to pivot from this inflection moment? And that's really what it was. It was an inflection moment. What do we do now that the paradigm has really and truly shifted? How do we need to shift our business's paradigm so that we manage our stress better? And that stress management was one of those big shifts to exactly your question. And so that involved things like making sure we focused on sleep, making sure we focused on proper nutrition instead of just gobbling up all the quarantine snacks in the first week kind of thing. What do we do to keep our energy up by exercising? And also, what did we do as a family, for example, since we've got 4 kids. And so that's like 1 million kids in the house at one time during quarantine. And so what do we do to get their energy out so that we can have a little time to focus? And for example, for us, that was things like family walks each day, which helped on a whole lot of different levels. So these are some of the ways we worked on it. But for me particularly, if you're asking, how did I, Chris Lavelle, work on it? Humor. That's the biggest thing. If somebody were to ask me what's my superpower, what is it that I rely most on in the world, it absolutely is my passion and love around humor and what it can do for people to improve their mindset, their perspective, etc. Now, I'm not talking about putting your head in the sand and cracking jokes. There's an element of that, But more than anything, what can it do for you to help you shift your perspective? I've talked about perspective a lot on our discussion today. And I really think consciously working to shift your perspective, maybe in an anxious situation, and whatever tools help you do that, that's one of the best things you can do. Because I gave you an example of how I came from an entrepreneurial background. My lovely bride came from an entrepreneurial background, but we had two very different perspectives on
Right.
entrepreneurship.
And that changes everything.
It does. It does. And once I began to shift that perspective, for example, I was on board. Let's go. Full speed ahead. Warp factor 5. And so that's what I suggest people do, is find the thing that helps them get that perspective shift. For me, that's humor. And then, of course, applying the BAM I talked about. It sounds like it's probably okay to say BAM stands for bare ass minimum in that context.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
So, yeah, there we go. And so apply that BAM to whatever that thing is for you. Do it every day. Do it frequently. Do it consistently. And that'll give you a stronger baseline. You get to move your base camp up that mountain we talked about. And now you're moving from a higher base camp.
I love it. So, Chris, if people are looking to track you down, or you and Amanda, it is to go to this site, correct?
Correct. You can go to amandakaufman.net. If you're on Facebook, you can go to the Crush Method page. It's the Crush, CRUSH method page. That's the main page for our business and what we do to help coaches. And of course, you're welcome to find me as well, Chris Tex-Rex Lavelle, on Facebook. I always love to share positive humor with folks to kind of help them along their way.
Also known because of his superpower as Meme Man.
I prefer Meme Lord. Let's be clear.
Yes, sir.
There you go.
So, Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Truly, truly appreciate it. And
My pleasure.
to those of you who are joining in the audience, thank you for coming along on this journey. And just one other thing I do want to mention, because of the challenges of this time, like even, and maybe especially with things opening up and the uncertainties and all that going on, if you are challenged with the pressures and such, and the resilience to get through this, I've actually made my Mindfulness 101 program available for free for during this time. So you can just go to 2020presence.com and put in the coupon code CALMUNITY, and you will get full access to the full program for free. So please join us there.
Fantastic, Robbie. That's a wonderful gift you're giving to the world.
Thank you so much. And
well, thank you for inviting me to join you. I really appreciate it. This was great fun.
This was a pleasure, and I hope you have an amazing July 4th weekend. I hope things are calm for you.
Thank you much. I hope so too. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend too. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you all, and we will